For marker printing, we're going to need a few things. In your bin, you will find lots of paper towels. You will have cups of water with really broad brushes, and there will be laminated mats. For the laminated mats, those are for our paper. Don't color your plate on the mat. It will make the paper very dirty later. Put the plate on the table while you color. The paper we're using is very thick, so it should hold up to the water well. Don't forget to write your name somewhere on it. And write it on the front or the back, it really doesn't matter. I'm going to put this paper and the mat to the side while I color my printing plate in. Now, before I started using this marker, I tested it to make sure that it wasn't dry. There will be some scrap paper in your bin as well. Just take your marker and color a few lines just to make sure it's not dry before you put it on your printing plate. If you're coloring with a dry marker, later there won't be enough ink on this plate to transfer to your paper. Oh, see, that is, forgot to test, but I could tell it was very new because of how much ink was moved onto the printing plate. You can do whatever color combination you want. You don't have to color it in using the shapes like I am. You can color it in stripes if you want the whole plate to be striped together. You have to be careful to stay in the lines if you're going to color like I am, because the markers will mix together on this foam. The ink right now is just sitting on top. It's not soaking in. So you can see this turquoise is blending in with the pink because I didn't stay in the lines. So it's going to change the color on here, but it's also going to change the color on the pink as well. You can see that it looks dirty. If that happens, when you're done coloring with the marker, just use that scrap paper to color around to clean the marker back off. I've colored the inside of the mouth and the eyes black, which is kind of traditionally what you see with tikis. And I've decided to do the background in black as well. You can do patterns in the background. You don't have to do a solid color. Because my tiki mask is so big, I decided just to do one solid color. If you made your face a lot smaller than mine and you have a lot more background, I would suggest using a pattern or a couple different colors to break up the space. I'm trying very hard not to touch the part that I've colored already, because by touching it I could be lifting the marker color and putting it on my fingers and taking it off the plate. There will be a time when you kind of have to do that a little, because my plate is almost completely covered now. So I'm trying to touch it as little as possible. Try and color as fully as possible. Try not to scribble, because these lines that I'm making with the marker will show up when I print this. So I'm trying to make my lines all kind of going the same direction, making the coloring neat so it doesn't just look like I scribbled all over my plate when I go to print it. my printing plate is finished. Your first print may not be your favorite print. That's okay. I'm going to very carefully move this to the other side of my mat because I don't want to get any water on it. I want the paper to have water. So you're going to take your brush, you can scrape a little bit of the water off, but you're going to need to wet your paper quite a bit. So I'm putting a lot of water down. You don't have to get all the way to the edges because I'm not going to print way out there, but I should have enough that the paper is super shiny. Right now, water is sitting on the surface of the paper. What I want is the water to sink inside the paper. So I need to wait for a bit and let the water kind of sit on the paper and soak into the paper. I would say maybe count to like 30. I can tell that it's starting to sink because some of the areas aren't as shiny anymore. And the paper isn't curled up anymore. It's starting to flatten back down, which means the water is getting inside my paper. I accidentally got a little bit of marker on this side, and that color is starting to kind of bleed with the water, which is why it's really important not to mix the marker and the water too early. Once the paper has been sitting for a bit with water, you're going to take a paper towel, ball it up very lightly. Don't squeeze it into a tight ball because it's not really going to do a good job. You want to kind of have a loose ball. So keep your hand like open like this and kind of gently ball it up. It should have a really big surface. I'm going to blot my paper. I'm going to take the paper towel and just tap all around the paper. What I'm trying to do now is get rid of the surface water. I don't want my paper to be shiny. I need the inside of my paper to be wet, but the top of my paper to be just moist. So I'm tapping, looking at the surface now, and there's some shiny areas still, so I'll use another part of my paper towel to kind of tap it off. You don't want a shiny surface. If you need to, you can kind of bend to the side or hold your paper. You can put your eyes level with the table to see. Sometimes that helps too. Now I can see at the top it's a little shiny, but I don't really mind that very top being shiny. Everything else is good. Now, before my paper dries, I need to take my printing plate and put it on top. And I need to smooth it down a lot. So I'm going to take my hands, press into it. I want the marker to come in contact with that water that's inside my paper. So I'm pressing hard with my fingers up and down, making sure I get all the edges, all the corners. And then I will lift it. I have a marker print. It turned out pretty well. What you need to do is remove the paper from the mat quickly. The mat is still wet, and extra water will start to blur and smear your print. To keep it from smearing, you're going to put it on the drying rack. Now I have a printing plate that has some marker on it, but not enough to do another whole print with. So I need to wash my plate off. I'm going to take it over to the sink and let the sink do most of the work. It should rinse right off. You might see a little bit of color after that. That's okay. you're going to get rid of the extra. You can see that the drips, you can see that the drips are colored, which means there's still a little bit of marker on here. You can take some paper towels, kind of gently put them on the surface. You don't want to bend your plate. If you bend your plate, you're going to snap it. You don't want to do that. Now, I'm drying this at the sink. Really, I should dry this at my table because there might be somebody else who's waiting to use the sink. So I would just take a couple paper towels and bring them back to the table. After it's mostly dry, I should be good. Now, dry it the rest of the way when I'm back at my table, because we can't have a wet printing plate when we start using markers again. Feels damp, so I'm going to let it dry for a minute while I think about the next color scheme I want to do. Now, I mentioned that you could do a pattern just on top of it if you wanted. So I could say I'm going to do stripes, and I'm just going to color straight across my plate. Could also create patterns as well. Just make sure the entire plate gets colored in. Don't leave white space. If I leave white space, I won't have those lines in my foam. These lines aren't just going to show up. I need to cover the surface of my print in order for the lines to show up. I kind of messed up over here. I think I'll just make this solid instead. Don't stress too much if you mess up with the marker. Just turn the design into something else. We're making prints, so you can always make a different print if there was an idea you really liked but it didn't work out the first time. Now, I've chosen a color scheme of greens and purples. Be a nice thing to try out. Pick like a few colors. It's called a controlled palette. Oh, my marker got too close again to the foam and it's starting to bleed together. Remember, if you do end up with blending markers by accident, just take a moment with your scrap paper and color it off. Otherwise, the next time you go to grab that marker, it's going to mess up what you're doing. Alright, I'm going to repeat my steps. Get my scrap paper out of the way, move my plate to the other side, away from the water. Take my brush. Oh, did I write my name? No, I didn't. I'm going to write my name. Again, it doesn't matter if it's on the front or the back. Dip it in my water, scrape a little bit, and put a lot of water on this paper. It should just be sitting in puddles on top. I'm not going to rub it too much. I'm just going to press it in enough that the water is going to start working its way into the paper. And then I'm going to wait. You'll see the paper start to curl up. What you're waiting for is the paper to start flattening back down because the water has sunk into the paper. The surface right now is extremely shiny. And what I was saying earlier about looking at it from the side, if you look at it from the side, you can very clearly see just how shiny the paper is. I might have brushed a little too much. There's a lot of little spots. when you're using the brush, just brush a little bit to get the water down and then stop. Kind of counting slowly in my head, touching the paper too, just to see. It still feels really stiff, which means that the water hasn't sunk too far. You're looking to let it sit for like a minute or two. You can start to see some areas are not as shiny as others anymore, which means water is starting to sink in. Which means it's time to take the paper towel. I can reuse the one I had if it's not too wet. If it's super wet, you can get a new one. Kind of ball it up very loosely with your hand and blot. Trying to get all the surface water off. Don't rub your paper. I'm gonna check. Oh, I got some marker on here because I had marker on my fingers. Looking for any shiny spots. Once you blot it, you need to work quickly. Don't sit there and talk with your neighbors or walk around. As soon as you blot it and it's not shiny anymore, this looks good, it's wet but not shiny, I need to put my printing plate down right away. I'm rubbing all the edges down. You don't need to worry about it being crooked because we're gonna cut the edges off later. All right. Now I still had a little bit too much water because I can see some areas that are starting to bleed. It still looks really neat. Either way, when the little areas start to bleed, it's not a big deal. You can see areas where next time I think I'm going to make sure I add a little more marker because it's a little spotted here. Don't let it sit on your mat because it will continue to blur your print. Put this on the drying rack right away.